Hi everybody, this is On, and I'm coming to you with this month's Connecting Codes work. So welcome, Code Warriors, and I just want to kind of put it out there. It's amazing how we go through these phases, right, of things, and you know, it seems like I always start with these small little pieces, and then it turns into this whole wealth of information that just unfolds. So I'm kind of writing with this and letting it go. As you may have remembered last month, I put out a multi-part series on things. So if you didn't get a chance to see that, go check it out. Really some interesting information in there. And this work is really about looking at things that are happening in our world, political events, giving some code insights to things that are going on in our world, and just opening up to exploring different possibilities of things. And we've got a lot of big things that are going to be coming up in the codes in 2022 where we really need to start learning to come together. We really need to start learning how we're going to work together, even though we have these different views on things, these at times even very, very opposing sides on things. And so in keeping that in mind, we definitely want to, you know, if we're going to get to that point, we need to understand more about what is going on, what the different pieces are that play into the choices that we're being faced with. We also need to look at the different aspects of how different things are playing out in the world. And I think we're going to still continue to see a lot of truth coming out, a lot of pieces that are opening up that are going to share more and more information. And I think that we're going to be seeing lots of different shifts in thoughts. And so many times when we start getting into the political areas, when we start getting into world issues that are going on, there's so much division that is separated in it. And so this month, the big topic that I'm working on is the breakdown of humanity, because I think it's really important if we are going to actually stand up for the things that we need to stand up for, if we're really going to stand in the soul self, then we need to also understand how humanity is being broken down. We need to understand how we're being played. And to sit there and get defensive about everything and say, well, that's not us, that's not this, you know, you're right, you're wrong, this person's stupid, that person's, you know, walking on water. We're going to have to get out of these divisions. And we can't get out of the divisions unless we start to understand how this breaking down of humanity occurs. Because once that happens, it's almost like it's game over. I never say absolute, because there's always possibilities to shift and to change along the way. But at the same time, we really, really need to be careful of some of these things that we're going into. So I'm going to break this up in a couple of parts. There'll be a couple of different videos, and hopefully that is, you know, going to make it easier for people in some ways. And we'll just take this in these different parts, because I really see there's three key parts in this breaking down of humanity. And the first part is where the narrative gets set and some of the players that are involved in that. So we're going to be talking about that in this particular video. And then on the next round of videos, or the next section to this series, is going to be about how the experiments are put into action, how people are led into certain actions, how this hate and this division gets created along the line, these absurd rules and things like that that come up, and are we really getting what we think we're getting? And so much of the human race is being played right now. That's the reality of it. Like it or not, no matter what side of the fence you're on, what position you have, we are being played and we're being experimented on. And then the third part of this is about how control of humanity is taken. And we'll be looking at the aspects particularly of credibility crisis and what that is all about and how that plays out. So this should be a really interesting series, and I'm going to try to I always think I can shorten this, I can narrow it down, but I can make no promises because there's always a ton of information to get through. So let's get started in this, and let's start right off here with how the narrative is set and some of the patterns that come up. And so one of the things when I'm working with codes that I'm always looking for is, what are the patterns that I see? So there's always certain news narratives which come up, right? And they come up like in a series. They come up like all of a sudden you'll see riots breaking out in certain, all across the country, and it'll be one and then another and then another. Or when we start looking at crime, there'll be a certain type of crime that comes up around. And it's in these patterns that we start to see the narratives. And that's a really big thing. So, for example, one of the big narratives that kind of just jumped out at me recently, and this will be a good example of how these things are set, is where we've had Black people being shot by white cops, and particularly we've had these situations of teen girls who were going to stab somebody being shot, it wasn't even just girls, some of the situations were guys, but they involved possible stabbings. They involved wielding knives. They involved these common themes. So, you've got these teen girls, you've got stabbing, you've got knife, you've got police officer. So I'm looking at all of these different components, and we'll come back to the code shortly on what these things are. But when we get into it, for example, Mckia Bryant is the big one that's been in the news lately in Ohio. She was a 16-year-old girl who was a stabber, and there were actually, there was one girl that she was trying to kill. She actually went after two girls, or a girl and a woman, I'm not sure exactly, and the girl that she went after was 13 years old. And this was in close connection to the verdict on Chauvin. And then we had the night before in Columbus, Ohio, a 13-year-old girl, Nayara Givens, was stabbed to death in there. And in Chicago, an officer shot and killed a 13-year-old Adam Toledo. So you see there's a pattern. There's a 13-year-old involved in all of these. So right off the bat, why all these 13-year-olds? Why is it affecting that particular age, that number? And it's a very, we know numbers are powerful things, and 13 is a pretty auspicious number in a lot of circles in a lot of ways. We also had a female police officer that was stabbed to death in, I think it was Paris. And the man was screaming, Allahu Akbar, which is, basically a claim to Allah or in the name of Allah. But we got to be careful about these things, because that doesn't mean that everybody who praises Allah is somebody who's, going out and killing people. And that assailant was also shot dead. So you see this is coming up all around the world at the same time, and these all happened within about a 1 to 2 week period. We also had Deputy Andrew Hall fatally shot Tyrell Wilson, who was a 32-year-old, after he pulled a knife on the deputy and said, "Kill me," and went charging at him. That was another one that we saw. A Nashville officer shot a man yielding 2 butcher knives that went on. So, I mean, you can see the common themes. And when I see this, and I see it all come out in a very short period of time, it makes me go, yeah, there's narrative here. You just don't get the same thing being brought out. And normally, we have to think, okay, there's shootings all the time. There's stabbings all the time going on. Jesse grew up outside of Los Angeles. You get into certain areas, certain towns, certain sections. It just happens. It's part of what is in those areas. You get into a town like Chicago. It's part of what happens there. New York, these large cities. And yet why these? Why are these being publicized? Why are these the ones that are brought out into the spotlight versus all of the other ones that go on every single day? And the reason these are brought out is because they have the ability to play people in a certain way. They have the ability to support narratives. They have the ability to set the stage, as we say, for what they want to do or what they want to bring forward or to support, be it agendas, be it conspiracies, be it whatever it is, be it plans that they want to set in motion. And, you know, we don't like to think in these terms that there is anything but these random instances. But the reality of it is that they're not just random instances. And that's what we've got to start grasping as society. And instead of sitting there going, we got to ban all the police officers, or, you know, we've got to stop people from carrying knives, or this or that, or and making it these race issues and making this all these things, what we've got to do is start looking at who is creating these narratives. And we've got to join together instead of fighting each other and start holding these people who are putting the narratives in place accountable. And they're basically using everybody. And all these are, in most cases, really are staged events, whether they're totally formally planned, like some of the riots. Those are really staged events. They're really well planned out. Or whether they're coming from other aspects that may even have the players in the staged events not even know that they're a part of it. And that happens a lot of times, especially when we see these patterns. And this is where it comes into some of the things that people say, oh, you're just crazy, you're out there, that's, you know, conspiracy stuff, that's not real. But it is real. And I've seen it in motion, and I've seen them put these things together. So when I start to talk of these things, sometimes we don't even see what's going on because we only focus on one piece at a time, and we don't stop to put the pieces together, and I think that's really important. So one of the first things that I look at is what's the narrative being set in the headlines. And the headlines will almost always be an indication of the narratives, right? And one of the big narratives, the big race narrative, is the thing, has been a thing that has been going on for at least, well, it's been going on for a long time, but it's been very, very in the news for at least the last year throughout the pandemic stuff. And so now, instead of just saying, hey, teen was shot by a cop, or teen was shot trying to stab, you know, while trying to stab another teen, it's always now a black person being shot by a white cop. Now, why are these the only ones making the news? Because it's not like there's others. When you go in and you look at the statistics, it's actually usually a black cop against a you know, black person. And that's where the bigger ones are criming. But see, that doesn't fit the narrative. That's not going to create division. That's not going to create anger in people. That's not going to create these strong emotions. They're going to charge people up and to keep them watching news things or keep them watching headlines. And so this narrative gets set, for example, in this case, by identifying race in headlines. And this is no different than like a reality show, okay, where the film crew pits people against each other. You think you're watching a reality show and you think you're watching, oh, it's live time and everybody just naturally does this and this is who they are and they're never triggered. Well, that's not true. When you get into the back scenes and look at what happens behind the scenes, they have people that go in and specifically say, hey, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said that. And they trigger these fires. They trigger these competitions. They trigger this anger between people, and they take things and they twist them, and then that creates a drama, and then people want to watch that drama. okay? And that's where it comes from. So the same principle is used actually in world events, especially the ones that are put in the news. So you have basically, in this case with the teen girls in Ohio, they were allegedly fighting over housekeeping. Now, okay, granted, we're talking foster home situations, we're talking kids who have already come from challenging family situations, broken family situations, not that they're victims or have to be victims, because they don't have to be, but they've certainly had some challenges. And of course that plays into other narratives that we know that have been going on that they've admitted to, where one of the big ways that you take control of a family is over the years you break down the family unit, and that's been well noted. They've been breaking down the family unit for the last 50 years in our country. It's just happened so gradually and so in such small increments that we haven't really been on to what they're doing, and that's part of how we've gotten to the point that we've gotten to. And so normal teenage girls, yeah, they're going to have some fights, they're going to have some competitions, they're going to have some jealousies, but you don't just go off and decide you're going to kill somebody because of a basic housekeeping difference, which is what was in the article. So you basically have one paid or control actor, and literally people will be paid to start a fight with somebody. They'll be paid to go in and create a ruckus somewhere, whether they know somebody or not. I'm not saying that's the case in this particular thing, but you can have a controlled actor situation. And that can happen through MK Ultra assassin energy, or MK Ultra sleepers. And there's a lot of kids in this teen generation, and even the generation above them, where as children, through different situations of trauma, through different other things that they've been exposed to along the way, usually it's through a trauma point that they'll use, that there is programming that is put into their minds, okay? And that programming is often done very young. It can be done as a baby, as a child, as all kinds of things. And then that programming sits very dormant inside of them for a long period of time. And then whenever they choose to activate that program that has been put in there, because see, when we're in trauma, our mind is very susceptible to picking up programming. And so for her, the trauma could have been going through foster care. And that program gets inserted in, and that may lie dormant for years and years and years, and then all of a sudden, that programming can be activated for a narrative. So they can actually take that programming and say, okay, now we're going to activate this in somebody's brain, and then we'll send them a text message, or we'll get them to play a game, or we'll, on their phone, or whatever it is, they'll send them something that will have a word or a picture or something that will trigger that programming. And then that programming literally programs them to go and kill somebody. It literally wakes them up from being in this kind of dormant state, and then gets them to take a particular action that will feed a narrative. So they use these people along the way, and then they can shut it down again. Same sort of thing. Now, most of these people who are like the ultra assassins, a lot of times they are celebrities. They're people that are famous, but not all of them. There's a lot of just everyday kind of common people, and they specifically have targeted certain races. So, you know, it always hurts me when I see people of different ethnicities going through these things, and then the anger gets focused on another class or something like that, and there's really no clue who the real people are that are behind the scenes, the real people that have created the issue or who have created the situation. So then they'll use this kind of trigger word. And even you know, even in these days, there's even forms of pot that when they're smoked, they have certain things attached to them that will trigger certain mind programmings. And one of the pot groupings that was released was actually named after MK Ultra, and it's because it releases the brain in a certain way, again, to allow the programming to happen, to allow it to unfold. Now, when somebody has an MK Ultra assassin programming in them, they usually have a handler that is nearby. And we're going to see that in one of the videos. I'm going to point that out, one of the pieces of videos that I'm going to share, because there's one video that shows a person that's kicking a woman in the right kind of near the head while she's on the ground to prevent that person from interfering in the killing. And so that handler is actually protecting the assassin from being interfered with. They're kind of like a bodyguard. And in the celebrity circles, there oftentimes are literally a bodyguard in there. So these things get set up. Everything is a setup. Everything is a setup. So this girl may not have even known that she was operating on this program. And a lot of times when these programs are triggered, it's like they don't even know who they are. You know, they don't even know what they're doing. It's almost like somebody who slips into another personality. They don't really know. With everything being a setup, the second narrative that we have playing out in this situation is that white cops are bad. The police need to be defunded. That's another narrative that fits in this whole thing. Look at how they just shot. Well, you know, there's tons of stuff out there you can research on why you don't do it, because, you know, in that situation, if an officer hadn't shot, the other person would have been killed. And, you know, this is what happens when you're a police officer. You have to make a decision. Are you going to stand there and let somebody be killed? That would be against your oath. So they have to do the things they have to do. So these officers, everything is being set up that there's no choice for the officer other than to shoot. And this is, you know, again, a whole setup. They're sacrificing. They're literally sacrificing one life to make this narrative play out. And it's disgusting. They don't tell this person who is under the programming or a paid actor that they're being used as a human sacrifice. And that is literally what we're doing. I'll show you a clip that verifies that. And you know, really, who are they sacrificing? They're sacrificing Black lives. So Black lives, there's groups of people who believe that they're supporting certain politicians, certain groups in there, like the BLM movements and things like that. And they think that they're supporting the right thing. And those are the very ones who are sacrificing them, are the people that oftentimes they're supporting. And we'll see that even more as this narrative plays out. So it's not that it's the police that we need to worry about, but who's creating the triggers for the stabbings. And then the third piece that they bring into the narrative is that the killer is a victim. So with Mckia, for example, her mother comes on, she's completely calm, she's not crying, and then she says, oh, she was such a loving and peaceful girl that promoted peace. And we know that loving girls, they don't just go out and stab people. They don't just flip a switch like that and go from life is okay to nothing's, you know, okay. Yes, teens are temperamental, teens have emotions and all of that, but they don't flip from being peaceful to being a killer in a matter of seconds unless they're under some kind of programming, unless they're being set up in some way. It doesn't happen. And then they follow this whole narrative up with celebrities weighing in. Why, you know, again, why this one instead of all the other ones that happen? I mean, Beyonce posted immediately, you know, upon this happening. I mean, you're telling me big celebrities are just sitting around ready to post about a person that they've never met, that they never know, that they don't do anything about because, you know, they're just sitting around waiting. No, of course not. What is happening is they've been told who is going to be targeted, who is going to be the sacrifice, and then they watch for it to happen. They watch for the news thing to come out immediately, and then they just immediately start posting on it. They watch for this. They're told ahead of time. So they're watching for it. That's how they know to respond. Because either you get the connection in that person and you know what's going on. I mean, you don't just sit around as some big celebrity and you know, be able to post within seconds. You're not spending your time that way. Going, oh, I wonder who's stabbing who today. I wonder what, you know, person is going to be shot by a cop today. You don't spend your time that way unless somebody has said, this is going to be a sacrifice, this is what's going down, and we need you to make a comment. Okay? Otherwise, it doesn't happen. And then they have a repeating thing that locks in the brainwashing, that locks in the programming. And in this case, it was say her name, say her name, say her name, which was the same as what they used in George Floyd, which was say his name, say his name, say his name. And this was a BLM thing. And then BLM weighed in on this. So you see, it comes all back to this Marxist circle. It comes all back to this narrative, to this agenda, to this plan. We want to do this because if we do this and we get this narrative right, then we can control people. Then we can push through these other things that are absolutely tyrannical and authoritarian in nature. So let me go ahead and jump over here and let's take a look. And the first clip that I have here for you is Nancy Pelosi. And she says it right off in just a few seconds here. How, for example, George Floyd was a sacrifice in this, in her situation. And this is just verifying that indeed, and whether this was a Freudian slip or what, I don't know, but it definitely verifies this aspect that people are being used as a sacrifice. Particularly, Black people are being used as a sacrifice, and the elites like Pelosi and others, in their game. They're being used as pawns in their game. And I pray to God every day that those of different ethnicities will stand up and see how they're being played by these people that they've been supporting. So she actually gets into this aspect of your name's going to be synonymous with justice, but they don't really tell you what justice, who justice is for. And that justice is not about the justice that we think, like a wrong that's being made right. It is a justice that is done by people who are seriously corrupt and brainwashed out there, that feel that there's an injustice against them because people don't want to follow their narratives, because people don't want to conform to what they want to do or to be controlled by them. So that's where that happens. Now, we have this aspect of, in the shooting with Mckia, and she fell, there's the whole story here of what played out about the officer, and I'll be putting links in for you so that you can go and look at things yourself. Now, I'm never really a fan of CNN, and they've been really getting brought out in, exposed for their lies and their corruption and things lately. So I really just feel like, but they had the best video. Let's put it that way. They had the best video of things showing the different avenues of things, and this gives, of course, some more information. And even in this article, for example, they connect it to George Floyd because it happened right as, very close to when they were giving the verdict. But let's take a look at this piece of video here, and this is just about 2 minutes long. If you're overly sensitive, you may not want to watch some of this because it does show the shooting in it. So I just want to give people that heads up in case you need to look away. Okay, so you see that girl that fell to the ground? She is the first one that was attempted to be stabbed. That was the first one that the 16-year-old that was killed took a knife towards. And that's where that pushing down came. And you see it right here. There's a guy right here that is at her side, and nobody ever talks about this guy. And watch, he just gives her an absolute kick. Kicks her right in the head. And then over here, this is the girl. This is the girl that was doing the stabbing. This is the girl that was about to be stabbed. And one of the things about the MK Ultra programming, by the way, is they oftentimes will have people wearing black or white. And a lot of the pictures that you see of Mckia have these, will have like a white shirt on or things like that. And the white represents, they oftentimes will be wearing white when they're in their non-tainted pure space, but they'll almost always have black on when they're under programming, when they're under the control. You see that? So they've already called and saying that there's people here trying to stab us, that they're trying to put their hands on her grandma. So she was not just going after this one girl, she was going after multiple girls. So, keep this in mind. You've got the pink is kind of representing the purity. So when the MK Ultra programmings are going on and they're in that sort of assassin space, or the sleeper has been awoken to take a particular action, they oftentimes are going to attack somebody that is in some way representative of something pure in that moment. So the pink clothing, the lighter clothing, is that contrast to the programmed state of the girl that was doing the killing. Okay, so look at this woman and listen to her. Her daughter has just been killed by police officers. She is calm. There isn't a tear in her eye. She is, I mean, it's just like another day to her in some ways. And I don't want to discount what's happened to her. That's not what I'm trying to do here. But if your daughter had just been shot by a police officer, wouldn't you be, I don't know, semi-hysterical, or at least bawling your eyes out, or crying, or something? But there's absolutely nothing from this mother. There's no aspect of, oh my God, my daughter's died. And here again, this plays into the narrative. This is not normal. So, I mean, it just doesn't match up. So then when you come down to this, and she's saying she promoted peace, the connection that hasn't been blatantly brought out is the connection to BLM, which is there, and that the peace promoting had to do with supporting the BLM movement. And as we move on to this, and here again, the next crazy piece is that you get these celebrities coming out almost right afterwards, and they want to start talking about it. And here again, all these celebrities that are coming forth, this is part of the narrative. And what is this doing? This is solidifying the narrative. This is saying, look, they do this. They use celebrities because people oftentimes look up to celebrities and they say, oh, if the celebrity is saying this, then it must be true. Which, hello, these people are actors, they're actresses, they're performers. Just because they're a celebrity doesn't mean that they're doing a good thing. Matter of fact, most of the time, celebrities are being used to promote a narrative of one form or another. And the ones that don't want to promote it oftentimes are kind of moved out of the scene. They're kind of shifted away from everything. But here they are reacting. Did you catch that? Okay, so they're leading us to believe that these celebrities were just sitting around with nothing else to do, happened to catch this person's death, And here again, they had to sneak it in there. And yet another black person, okay, you know, so here they are playing in all of the narratives that are going on. So you're starting to see this picture, you're starting to get it, you're starting to understand that these are not just innocent news stories that come out and are coincidentally happening in things. They're just not. And so this is really, you know, an important piece in there. So we want to keep this in mind. Now, as I come back in here, I want to share some of the code pieces that go along with this. You have the code pieces of teen girls here. Teen girls, anytime you have a multiple of girls or a teen girl involved in something, it's opening up competition energy. It is opening up this aspect of where they need to either embrace being successful or you're going to open up jealousies that are happening. So then if you have competition and jealousy that is going on, now if we actually put the aspect that this was black teen girls that were in here, then this is all about, in the codes it shows us, that combination and the energy of the black energy can be victims and abusers or bullies going on. So that's not just because of the colors, that's an energy pattern that opens up in combination with things. And when that combines with the teenage energy or the teenage girl energy in particular, what it does is that combination comes out to show that this is about teaching a lesson. This is about showing people where they're attempting to be successful in what they are trying to teach. So when I say that, when we look at that in relation to a news article like this, then it's about teaching people that they are going to be successful in putting this racist narrative through in things, that they're going to be successful in helping to get some of these agendas through. Now, when we look at the essence of a stab or stabbing that's going on, stabbings are connected to materialism. They're connected to corruption that is trying to inhibit success by people that are standing in truth and justice. And so it's very interesting to see that coming out. So now we've got a lesson that is about materialism that is about the corrupt trying to teach other people lessons in here. Then we have the energy of a knife, and a knife can go different ways. Here again, a knife's energy and codes can be about truth and justice, or it can also be about representing the destruction of justice in there. So it's very interesting when we start to put this together. Now, the police officers' codes actually come up, and a police officer in general is to help, the energy in its true form is designed to help provide abundance through the aspect of constantly learning and helping to move us in a more favorable direction and to transform what is brings death and to open that into a sort of rebirth. And when we look at that with a white police officer in particular, that is about they're designed to bring in positive relationship energy. Now, that doesn't mean that that's because they're culturally white. That's just the codes that play out. So when a police officer is brought into their distorted energy, the design that goes along with a narrative like this is actually about destroying positive relationships. So now they become the person who is being used to destroy positive relationships. So when we start putting all of these pieces together, and we start to look at what they are, the culmination of them comes into competition energy. It comes in to the competition of, let's see here, the competition of literally a good versus evil. And so the codes unfold us to say this narrative is a good versus evil. It has nothing to do with race. It's not about one race being evil and the other is being good, although in a narrative situation in our world, that's what they want you to believe. But it is literally the bigger good versus evil that has nothing to do with race whatsoever in here. So that's kind of where the codes play out. Now, the next thing that I want to move into with this video segment for this part of the series is talking about liberals. And I know some people probably aren't going to be very happy with me for delving into this and exposing some of the things for liberals, but this is so important for us to open up. And again, this isn't about taking sides. This isn't about saying anybody's right or wrong in things, but what it is about is that liberals are the next big pawn that is being used. We've already heard it in some of the tapes released by Project Veritas, and I'll play some of that segment for you, where CNN has confessed about creating narratives, and they've confessed that the next narrative that they want to create is going to be the climate crisis issue. Well, this is going to then bring in the liberal energy, because the liberals, as we know, are very environmentally sensitive. They're very easy to be played right now. And I don't mean that to be insulting to anybody, but it's the truth, because the liberals have become very divided. They've become very separated from what they originally stood for. And this is why the terms of liberals and conservatives and all these things are getting very confusing these days, because the liberals and the conservatives are not the liberals and the conservatives that they originally started as. And they've shifted. And in the liberal ideology or the liberal mindset, there's so much conflict between their basic core principles and values and what they're supporting. And it's creating a lot of conflict. So now there's already a natural division in the liberals. And I have a lot of friends, by the way, that are liberals. So, I have a lot of people that I know who are liberals, some that are extremely strong liberals and some that are very moderate liberals and open-minded to different things. And here again, it's about opening up, because I want liberals to understand that just as blacks have been getting played, the liberals are the next to be played right now. Because the environment is a huge issue for them. The environment is a big concern for them. And they want to already, or are naturally already programmed to believe that anybody who is not a liberal or who votes differently than the way they would like them to vote or things like that has no concern for the environment, which absolutely is not true. And when we start to get into the facts, there's a lot of different layers to all of that. There's a lot of different pieces to all of that, because oftentimes what I've seen in people that I know that are liberals is they just want to jump into a solution without thinking it through. And it's sad, because there really are some good minds, and the liberals I know anyways, there's some really good minds there. And there's some really good hearts there as well. But they're so eager to find a solution, and they're already under the programming that there are issues that don't exist, like in climate issues in particular. So that's a huge thing. That's a huge thing, and this is going to be a huge awakening process, and it's going to be tough for some of them. But because there's already this sort of division there, they're going to be played. They're going to be the ones that are going to become the next target to be used, if you want to say that. And hopefully this will kind of wake people up a little bit, to where we've got to really get out of some of these terms as far as liberals and conservatives and things like that. And we need to get centered back into the issues. We need to get centered back into finding solutions together, honoring variety, honoring two different opinions, and seeing how we can come together. Because until we start to do that, they're going to continue to play all of us. They're going to continue to create these narratives that are going to separate and divide us. And eventually that will bring our downfall if we don't come together on things. So in codes, and I want to mention, originally liberals and patriots were very aligned. Originally, when you come into the founding fathers and things, they were of liberal energy. And we have a very different thing, though, because we have original liberals and we have current liberals out there. And the original liberals used to be really peaceful, but the current liberals are turning violent. And they're turning into things that are absolutely not of the liberal ideology. And that's not okay. That's not okay. The current liberals have gotten to a point where most of the time they just are angry and they are attacking an individual instead of addressing an issue. And that doesn't work. So when we look at the codes of a liberal or liberals, now liberal as an individual, the codes represent being of peace. If they're a true liberal, if they're standing in their pure liberal energy, they are about peace. But if they're standing in their distorted energy of a liberal, then they are an upheaval or a disruptor of peace under the guise of or in the name of peace. And that's what we've seen with riots, for example, because you're not going to bring peace through fighting and damaging and destructing. You're never going to break that cycle. You can't end a war with a war, okay? It doesn't work. At some point, you've got to come back into that peace, and that's where we're at. So I really am hoping that liberals will come back into that. As a plural, the code energy shows that liberals get stuck, they get put on hold where they have lessons to learn, where they are not in divine alignment. And this is the challenge, because liberals can be truly powerful if they're in divine alignment, but so much of what they're doing today is not in divine alignment, and it's not in these core principles of peace. And this is probably setting up some triggers for people, and that's okay. That's okay. It can, they can feel a little triggered by this. And that's because I want them to think. And it's not that I know better or any of that. I'm just reading the codes on this. And I'm really, if anything, making a call for them to step into their true power and their true essence of what they're really about, and to realize where they are and are not standing in that divine alignment. Now, climate crisis is really about creating upheaval to successes. So anytime there's successes that create freedom, that are based in wisdom, where wisdom is actually implemented, a climate crisis will be used to create upheaval, to create turmoil. And the purpose of doing that is actually to keep people from learning from the past. Now, Jesse has over and over again, so many times in her life, I don't know, 5, 6 times, been told the world's going to come to an end, this is it, we're all going to die in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, and none of it has come to happen. And when you really delve into it, it's not that people don't care about the environment or the climate or things like that. Of course we need to be conscious about it. Of course we need to take care of and protect the environment. I'm very, very pro doing that. but we need to do it in wise ways. We need to learn from our past. We need to not repeat the same mistakes of our past. And we need to come together and express the differences of opinions, because there have been a lot of lies and a lot of this climate issues is based in lies. And so it's pulled on the heartstrings of people who care about the environment without them actually researching things through, without them actually going in and doing it. And this climate crisis, see, there always has to be a crisis for an agenda to get put through. It's still a narrative, and it's the narrative that is being used for Agenda 2030, for creating a totalitarian-style society, which they say is for the betterment of all. But we have to keep in remember, if you suffocate the individual and you don't allow individuals to have freedom, to have voice, to be an individual, you don't have a society. You don't really have a society. You don't really have a community in there. And that's something to think about. So this totalitarian society that's in the process of being created, what it does is it's where the rich get to do whatever they want to do, and they have total control over everyone else, trying to keep them basically as lab rats, okay, under the pretense of sustainability, and then they brainwash people into believing that they have something good when at any moment that good can be removed or taken away or will be taken away, or that's a momentary thing until they bring in another trauma and another trauma and another trauma. There is no freedom in the system. People do not own anything except for the rich. The rich own all of it. And that's the piece that is being missed when we start to look at these socialist structures and we start to look at this community idea, this for the betterment of all idea, is that they don't realize that that type of society is only going to work when you have people who are not corrupt running things. But when the pockets of the rich are just getting padded over and over again in these structures, and that's what's happening, and they want more and more and more and more, and all you have to do is look to China for that example to see how that's worked out. And what happens? It creates slave labor. It creates people to do all kinds of things. And I'm going to get into some of these. So anyways, I wanted to get into that piece where liberals are a target because of their principles and what they're striving for, and because they're in this contradictory space. You know, what they're supporting, they're supporting these elite because they come on and they give them the fluffy words and they say, oh, we want to be for the environment, oh, we do this, but they're not following through on their words. They're not doing that. All they're really doing is taking care of the elite. And so the people that they're looking for to help them take care of the environment are destroying it. They're flying private jets around, they're doing all of these things. So we've got to look closer, and we've got to come back to the core aspects that we want to focus on, instead of just saying, I'm going to vote for this party or that party. We've got to come back and focus on the principles, because that's where we're going to get back to some of these true things. And it's, you know, it's very interesting because a lot of times I've been considered, a lot of people have thought, oh, you're incredibly, you know, liberal or things like that. And I'm one of those people that I can identify actually with a lot of liberal values, in the core values of equal opportunity for people, of, you know, everybody should have chances at things. And, you know, I don't necessarily believe we should just give people things when they don't want to, you know, I don't know, I don't want to say contribute in any way, but, you know, I believe that we do need to, you know, allow people to have the opportunities and not lock them in and not say you can only go here or you can only go there or things like this. That doesn't serve us. It never has served us along the way. But these aspects of equal opportunities, of freedom, I do very much identify with those. And I think that that's where we have to start to do it. And this is where some of the conflict comes in, is because people have different views on how to bring about these key aspects, these key concepts and things. So one of the aspects that I found here on lifepersona.com is that liberalism was an ideology that was based on the defense of individual liberties and the equality of human beings before the law. So because of this, they did not admit that the nobles and the kings were above the Constitution or other laws. And this is the thing also, because I know there's people listening in from all different countries, and liberals in different countries actually operate different, I think, than, say, liberals in the U.S. And that doesn't mean that it's not changing, perhaps somewhat, in other places. But, you know, you might have places in the U.K. where they're still following that classical version of liberalism, where they're still holding these principles that, you know, somebody of authority or royalty or celebrity positioning, they're not above the laws. But that's not what we're seeing in our society here in America. And it amazes me how many so-called liberals are supporting people who are not allowing the laws to apply to them. That, you know, they want everybody else to wear masks, but they don't wear masks. You know, there's this hypocrisy that is going on here. And they all believe they are above the laws. And I have to question to these liberals, it's like, okay, if this is your foundation, if this is your belief that individual liberties and the equality of human beings before the law, and that, you know, that nobles and people of authority and politicians are not above the law and the Constitution, then why are you supporting them in being that way? Why are you allowing them to get away with things? If you wouldn't allow somebody of the opposite belief to get away with it, why are you allowing people of your own belief to get away with it? And, you know, of what you're supporting, because they're really not supporting your values when you get down to that. And it's something to question, and it's okay, go ahead, put comments in the, you know, comment section and give your thoughts on it. But these are the things, you know, so many of the revolutions were about this. It was, and in other countries, many times it was a reminder that, hey, you in position of authority and power in politics, you know, we're not going to let you get away with this. You're not above us. We're going to hold you accountable. But that's not happening. That's just not happening with a lot of liberal things. Instead, what are they doing? They're cheering on people for being above the law. So it's this contradiction. This is what I'm seeing when it comes down into it. Now, I'm not here to discuss, you know, conservative liberal differences, but I want us to understand some of these principles of liberal aspects, because again, I'm making a call out to the liberals to come into the true liberal energy on many things, and to stop promoting and supporting these people who are not truly of your values. They're not truly about the freedom. They're not truly about justice and equality, and to wake up to how you're being played. These aspects of left-wing, right-wing actually started back in times where you had people, there were two different wings, and so they just kind of, you know, you had the left wing and you had the right wing of things, and that's kind of how that came about. And then people started grouping together in those wings based on their beliefs, you know, like sitting next to a friend versus sitting next to somebody you don't like so much, type of things. But even as we start to look at some of these basic pieces, you know, the liberals prefer more regulation and services like free universal health care to be provided by the government to all citizens. Here's the thing. We have to draw some lines. There's one thing to say, Okay, there'll be maybe a certain amount of health care for free or whatever, but there's another aspect to say, everybody's got to, certain people have to pay for that, but other people don't have to pay for that, or, now you're removing things, or to make it mandatory for people to pay into. Now you're starting to cross the line. You're creating these contradictions where you're removing freedoms in things. And so we have to realize that under these socialist systems, most of the time, they are not a fun system to be under. And that's exactly what you're doing when you get into this, is you're moving into a socialist system. It's not really about taking care of people. And most of the time, the health care that gets provided, again, the people of your politicians, your elite, your celebrities, they're not getting the same health care as everybody else. They're getting really good quality health care, while everybody else may or may not get health care. They may have to wait 3 or 4 months or 10 months or 2 years for a surgery or things like this. They're not getting quality care in there. And so we need to be aware, again, we got to come into balance. We got to stop sitting on these extremes, and we got to come into balance. They want the government to provide more services to the less fortunate, and oftentimes they believe the way to do this is through taxes. Well, first of all, we know taxes aren't really legal, okay? Second of all, and they'll be some of the first ones to complain when their taxes jump from 25% to 40% or things like this, and all the expenses are going up. Well, that's kind of what you voted for. And they believe, higher income people should pay larger percentage, and they already do. They already do pay that in the tax structures. And so, again, we got to get back to these things and look at, they're not really supporting these true values in here. They're not really supporting it. And there are ways that we can do these things without having to increase taxes, without having to make other people suffer to make it happen. Because once you cross into these suffering, once you let go of free choice, you are closing out the soul. You are not walking in a soul's path. And I know there's people that will argue with me about that, saying, well, the soul's path is about caring for everybody. Yes, but we can care for people without making other people suffer in the process, okay? Again, you don't relieve suffering by creating suffering in things. The soul's path can find the ways to help people. There's so many different options than taxes in there. And they look to the government to provide a lot of structure. So you've got to realize when you start to come into the structure, a governmental structure, what you're doing is you're turning your power over to somebody else. You're losing your voice. You're losing your freedoms and things. And when you centralize everything, you're now shifting into dictatorship. So when you want the government to provide everything, you're now operating against some of the fundamental pieces of being liberal, which is about freedom, which is about human rights. Because the human rights get removed under these centralized systems. Because who runs the centralized systems? It's not kind and compassionate people that are running these systems. It is people that are of the elite. It is people with agendas. It is people who are practicing eugenics that are running these systems. Now, as we move into it, we have the classical liberalism, like I said, as an ideology. We have the modern liberalism aspects. And the classical liberalism was the political philosophy that was put forth by the founding fathers. It's what America was based on in many ways. We're a republic that was based on these liberal principles. And it permeates the whole Constitution, the Federalist Papers, many other documents. And this is coming off the Goodman Institute, by the way, which is about public policy and things like that. And it runs through the creation of the American system of government in many ways. So here again, we've kind of had this shift. The liberals then, they opposed slavery, which, you know, this was the classical liberals that did this. They didn't want to see suffraging. They fought for equal rights and things. You know, in 1776, part of the big marking date of that was to get out of being under this rule, being under this heavy government rule, and declaring independence. It was about having rights that were apart from the government, and saying, look, people have part of their nature that they have certain inalienable rights as a human being, and that they can form governments, they can dissolve governments, and the only real role of the government is to protect these rights, not dictate them, not tell people what they can do or can't do, but to protect these basic human rights. And in the 19th century, classical liberalism was, you know, a huge part of why the economy grew, why it was increasing, why there was political liberty going on, why there was international peace that was happening in many areas. There was price stability on things. There was unprecedented economic growth that was going on. In contrast, as you move to the 20th century, that is the century where classical liberalism got rejected. And partly for that reason, it became the century of dictatorship, depression, war. Almost 265 million people were killed by their own governments, in addition to all the deaths from wars. And that doesn't even account for diseases or any other natural causes that people died from. So 265 million people, okay, were killed by this government rule aspect. It's a lot to think about. And this is why we've got to take a look at where liberalism is today versus where it used to be. And it just all gets jumbled. When we start talking about modern liberalism, modern conservatism, the sociologies, they're varied, they're complex, they're deep, there's a lot of layers to them. But you look at it and you say, you know, your Southern Democrats are different than your Northern Democrats, and this is why we've got to get out of the party, because there's good people on both parties and there's corrupt people on both parties. And we need to step away from parties and get down to who's operating in corruptness and who isn't operating in corruptness. So let's look at some of those Southern Democrats, for example, as it brings up here. For most of the 20th century, right up through the 1960s and even into the 1970s, virtually every Democratic politician in the South was an advocate of segregation and Jim Crow laws. That was the Democrats. And yet that is the party of most liberals. And this group, it included Arkansas Senator J. William Fulbright, which is a favorite of the liberal media because of opposition to Vietnam War. North Carolina Senator Sam Ervin, who was an ardent constitutionalist, another liberal, okay, that was favored. Lyndon Johnson, who was president, changed his public views on race and pushed through the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Economic populist is Louisiana Governor Huey Long, Alabama Governor George Wallace, West Virginia Senator Robert Byrd, who was part of the KKK, who's a KKK member. And, you know, these are the things that, this is why we've got to get out of parties, because they change. The corruption goes with wherever they think they can infiltrate in. And they go by creating these divisions. They grow by preying on some of these values, and then they put these people in who really are completely against the values, but they talk a good talk, and so then people think, oh, they're for us because they've done one little piece here, one little piece here, and then they turn a blind eye to real crimes, real crimes that are happening, and things that really create much greater suffering. We've got to get out of this, and we've got to come back to, as the people, saying, we're going to tolerate this, we're not going to tolerate that, and bringing it back to the issue of things. So you have all these things that liberals, stand up for, and, they're quite content to have, they want the right for marijuana use, but they don't want to allow experimental drugs for terminal cancer patients. Doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense in things. They're very set on restricting money and capital, but let's look at this from a spiritual aspect. Anytime you restrict, you are stepping out of spirit. Anytime you restrict, because the soul self, the divine self, the God self, is expansive by nature. So when you start to restrict things, when you start to control everything, you are literally suffocating the spirit out of the world. You're suffocating it out. They want restrictions on. It's always so selective, and I think that that's the thing that's so frustrating, is that they only want it to apply to certain people and not other people, and there again, that goes against their values of this aspect that nobody's above the law. So I think you're starting to get my point in some of this, and our modern liberalism has changed, and under this modern liberalism, they believe you should say anything that you like, no matter how much it offends somebody else, and no matter how it comes across. But when it's somebody that isn't in their group that does that same thing, then they just go on the attack and they say, no, you can't say that. See, there's a dual standard here, and that doesn't work. Either you want free speech or you don't want free speech. You don't get to say only these people get free speech and these people don't get free speech. If you're truly for free speech, that means free speech for everybody. And this is why they're going to be the people that get played. This is why, because they've got all these contradictions and all their hypocrisy, so they're ripe. They're ripe for the programming for these socialist, Marxist structures, and that's why they get sucked into them. That's why they buy into them, because of this hypocrisy factor that is involved. They just, it comes back to the same thing. You can't have freedom and you can't honor the individual when you suffocate the individual and you do things that restrict growth. It goes against the soul, and when you start going against the soul and divine principles, you run into issues. Nothing can survive that works outside of that. It will always crash because it will turn on itself and it will continue to crash from there. So I don't want to kind of keep going through all of these points, but you can even go on here. There's so many contradictions in where modern liberals are standing, because I really believe the classical liberals, what our country was founded on, these freedom principles, they're very, very different. They're very, very different in things. Racism is a big issue. And this is why, think about this, the issues that are coming out in our world are designed to trigger liberals. And again, because So many of them are not looking at the pure sense. Now, many of them are not looking beyond the issue. So many of them are not working from the traditional liberal values. They're getting swept up in these narratives, like racism. Racism is one of them. But in the process of trying to alleviate racism, they're being racist to other people. They're saying, well, we want to alleviate racism, but we want to exclude certain cultures and people from having rights, and they need to be last to everybody else. You don't do that. At some point, we have to learn from our past and say, this is it. None of us were in the past 100 or 200 years ago. Maybe we were incarnated in some shape or form at that time, could be. But the reality of it is we've got to work today and stop saying, we're going to make you pay for this. We've got to get out of this revenge mode, because the revenge mode, again, is not part of spirit. It's not part of the soul's self. We've got to get out of the revenge mode and then make the shift and say, how do we move forward in a wiser way? How do we move forward? You can't alleviate suffering by creating more suffering, because all you're going to do is create more suffering. We have to break the revenge cycles. We have to break this desire to make people so-called pay for something that they weren't even involved in along the way. And we need to start loving one another. We need to start caring about one another. And we need to come into compassion with each other and say, look, we're never going to be able to fix the past. The past is in the past. But what we can do is we can learn from the past, and we can change things in the present, and that will pave a road to a more favorable future for us. Codes talk about this all the time. Learn from your past, implement the lessons in the present, and you'll create a path to a favorable future, as long as you're working within these divine principles, as long as you're working with things in their true essence. Okay? You know, again, we can get into all kinds of issues here about different things. Again, the environment's going to be a big one because of the climate crisis coming up. And they want to, again, believe that conservatives don't care about protecting the environment, which is not true. It's just there's more things to look at. Again, there's more layers, there's more depths. And realizing that, you know, the liberals have bought into the global warming factor, which there's no facts to support it. There's no facts to support it. The information for global warming out there is based on a bunch of lies. And when you start to get in and really delve into it, you can find that information. I've brought some stuff up. I've shared some video clips in the past of those things and shown that. So we've got to get out of these modes and start looking at, instead of just slapping something up, why don't we look to the countries who've already tried it and said, oh, that's not so great, or oh, that's not so work, or, you know, some of these pieces where they want you to believe certain things. You know, it's like Joe Biden wants you to believe that he's so environmentally friendly that he rides his bike. Well, what they do is there's actually clips out there. They drive up to about a block from the White House, and they let him out. They pull the bike out of the car. They put him on. They videotape him riding his bike for a block or something, and then they follow him with the car. So are you saving any gas? Are you really being environmentally friendly? No, of course you're not. You know, they think these people are all for the green initiative, and then they're flying around in their private jets, or, you know, they do this demonstration to show whatever it is, solar or green energy of some sort, and then they, you know, it's all running off of electricity and running off of coal resources. And so it's really not green. It's like the only way they're doing it is to try to make you believe this works when it doesn't work. And they're having to plug it in and use these other resources anyways. So the only key is that I see here is that we have to be cautious, because most people on both sides really care about the environment. They love being outside. They love doing things. They love a clean ocean to go to. They love having a beautiful forest trail to go walk down, you know, in there. But just because I may not buy into, for example, a global warming issue doesn't mean I don't care about the environment. That doesn't, automatically. So again, we got to stop throwing people into these extremes. I'm very pro being in the environment. I mean, I'm constantly looking for ways and thinking about, what I can do to shift things and what I can do to keep things from not contributing. Because even though I don't want to live under all kinds of major restrictions on one hand, on the other hand, I do believe in being very conscious. And it's kind of like these things that the liberal agendas have passed, no single-use plastics. Well, think about this for a minute. When you go in and you get takeout from somewhere, right? And then you've got this container now that they've given you that is not a single-use container. Well, how many of those are you going to stock up around your house before you start throwing that container in the landfill? And then, you do that and you've got a thicker plastic that has to break down. I mean, there's just so many absurdities and contradictions, and this is why I say they're not always well thought out before they try to get implemented, because they come from the space of desperation and believing that they don't have time to work with. And we actually do have some time to work with, and we actually do need to just give things a little more consideration ahead of time. And you hear me talk about the hypocrisy, and even the news channels and the news sources, the main ones, have been calling out Biden on these things in this conflict of, if we're a democracy, this or that. And here again, the democracy terms are very different, because we want to keep in mind that democracy and Democratic Party are not synonymous. They're two very different things. Matter of fact, there's a lot of Republican beliefs, and a lot of what the Republic was founded on was democracy in many ways. And it was about a fairness, and it was about the people, and it was about keeping these balances in there. But a lot of people believe that the Democratic Party and democracy are one and the same, and they're absolutely not. And that's one of the things we have to get out of our heads. And again, I think if we could just come out of the extremes and start to talk to one another a little bit more, we could start to have conversations that could actually derive some reasonable solutions in things. And, this comes up where they're talking about, different aspects where Biden has flip-flopped along the way, and where he's gone in and he said, you'd have to be a dictator to go in and sign a bunch of executive orders. Well, then he comes into office, and in his first week alone, he signed 37 executive orders and actions as of, Thursday at that time, but back in January. And that's 33 more executive orders than Trump had signed, who he referred to as being a dictator. So he signs 33 more executive orders in the first week, and he wants you to believe he's not the dictator and Trump was the dictator. You see, there's an inversion thing that's happening there. He even signed 32 more than Barack Obama did, and 37 more than George Bush did. And so when we look at these things, he's saying, hey, you have to be a dictator to do this, and then he does exactly that. But they don't want you to believe that that's what he is. They don't want you to believe he's a dictator. And then they play on this liberal guilt trip thing of, if you're a liberal, you better be voting for Biden, you better be supporting him, but yet they don't want you to realize that he's operating as a dictator when under his own words he's operating as a dictator. and he says it. He says it right here in this, let's see here. So you see right there, I mean, he said, if you can't get it by consensus, you're not a democracy, you're a dictator. He's not working by consensus. He's just signing executive orders. We also had the Washington Post that came in, and it talks about equity being pitched by, what they call them Biden's handlers at the moment. And for those that are unfamiliar, equity is an academic concept out of the 60s, critical race theory and ethnic studies. And it's now influencing our White House administration on pretty much everything, whether it's social policy, censorship, economic matters, things like this. And what it does is equity treats people differently based on their affiliation with an ever-growing number of historically marginalized groups. And, here again, he's come into all of these different pieces of things. And usually equity is involved with big tech, academia, media, yes, the Democratic Party, but who's running all of those things? The elite. The elite is. So here again, we're crashing against those liberal values. And its focus is on systemic racism. Its focus is on these things with nothing to back it up in there. But he talks about this equality. He talks about how everybody should have chances, but then he doesn't really mean that. That's not what he's putting into place. And he says that he identified a cry for, in his inaugural address, a cry for racial justice for some 400 years in the making, which is controversial, a reference to the 1619 Project in there, and it just goes on and on and on and on, these contradictions that have been going on. Early on in his office, and this is off of the whitehouse.gov site, February 19th, 2021, where he was signing equality for LGBTQ plus Americans in there and their families. And, again, I'm all for everybody having equal opportunities, but I don't believe that we need to be making people more privileged than other people. Everybody should have an opportunity to go to school. Everybody should have, have these different possibilities. And I just don't think that we perfected the system. I don't think it sits on one extreme or the other. I think our solutions are somewhere in the middle and somewhere about bringing our differences together. But he goes on to say in here that he's directed agencies to implement the Supreme Court's Bostock ruling and fully enforce Title VII of the Civil Rights Act and other laws that prohibit discrimination based on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. Then he says, now it's time for Congress to secure these protections once and for all by passing the Equality Act, because no one should ever face discrimination or live in fear because of who they are or whom they love. Well, let's talk about that. Let's consider that for a minute, and these different pieces. And the Equality Act, again, let's see, the statement, they shouldn't ever face discrimination or live in fear. That's his own aspects. But what do we have right here? What do we have right here that he says? Did you get that? I'm hoping you heard that, because he says you shouldn't be insulting people of different races and ethnicities and various backgrounds, and then he turns around and he insults them. He insults our ethnic communities as being stupid, as being too stupid to know how to use a computer, being too stupid to know how to go stand in line for a vaccine should they want a vaccine. Of course, we also have this clip that made it around quite a bit. Calling people out again. You're too stupid to know who to vote for, and you're not black if you can't figure this out. I mean, it just, the racial slurs go on and on and on, and the hypocrisy goes on and on and on. Let's look for it, because most liberals voted down a Democratic ticket. A lot of them did. Not all of them, but a lot of them did. And again, we're seeing this divide where liberals have voted one way and they're just, I know some liberal people that are just like done with it, won't have anything to do with the Democratic Party after what they've seen over the last year. To me, that's like, okay, now you're true liberalism. It's not that they're coming forth saying, no, I'm going to go support the Republican Party automatically, but they're coming back to their core values. So let's look at these 10 examples that we had of hypocrisy of people that liberals have been supporting. Well, you got Governor Newsom, who, by the way, they now have validated he's got plenty of things to recall him, so that will be going up for a vote there. But, while he's telling everybody to, they can't have indoor dining and socializing, he was at a dinner party celebration with prominent lobbyist at a French Laundry in Napa Valley. And, plates and meals starting at $450 a person. So he was able to be in there unmasked inside dining, but other people weren't allowed to go in and have indoor dining. You have House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, where she went to the hair salon in the San Francisco area, right? And she was caught. Nobody else could go in and get their hair done. Nobody else could go into a salon, but Pelosi did. Rules for thee, but not for me. This is what I'm talking about. No one should be above the law. And if you are standing in those true liberal principles and those true liberal values, which liberals were founded on originally, you would not be tolerating this crap just because they claim to be of the Democratic Party. Okay? This is elite structure. This is everything that most elites are fighting against, is this injustice, this hypocrisy. And that's what I want. I want to see the liberals come back into who they really are. What about Deborah Birx's Thanksgiving dinner after telling people that their Thanksgiving celebration should include your immediate household, and then the White House, then she goes and she travels to one of her vacation properties in another area and has a celebration with 3 generations of her family who came from 2 different households. And then you've got President Biden's celebration. After signing an executive order mandating masks on federal property, he and his family were out without masks at the Lincoln Memorial, and his press secretary, Psaki, excused the behavior, explaining this was a celebration. And I think some of this, I'm sorry, some of this you weren't getting to see in here, so I apologize that you didn't get to see a couple of the little clips in there, but I think we're good now. John Kerry's airline adventure, where he was caught on American Airlines not wearing a mask, despite the airline's policies that people need to be wearing masks. And families have been booted off because young children who aren't even required when they're under the age of 2 to wear a mask were booted off of flights. You got your Rhode Island governor, Gina Raimondo, where she had a happy hour, and she was at a wine and paint night without a mask, just days after she said, stay home except for essential activities and wear a mask anytime you're with people. You got de Blasio in New York. Not only did he dance with his wife live in Times Square on New Year's Eve after shutting the entire area down to the public, then he goes and he visits his gym the same day. New York Governor Cuomo issued a state mandate to close all gyms. You see, when you look at these socialist structures, it's not going to be equal. They're not going to come down to your level. They are not going to come into your way of being. You've got Austin Mayor's Cabo vacation. Mayor Steve Adler flew down to Cabo San Lucas, where he filmed himself on Zoom, ordering his residents to stay home. Denver Mayor tweeted his residents should avoid travel if you can, and orders slow the spread of COVID. 30 minutes before, he boarded a cross-country flight to visit with his family. Philadelphia's mayor went out of state dining because his state had lockdowns, had mask mandates, so he went to a different state. I want liberals to wake up. I want them to get back to their original values, their original principles. And we had this aspect of, and I'm just going to play part of this clip that came out. And I know I don't always agree with Fox. I mean, Fox is kind of, can be a little out there sometimes too. But this, again, calls out many of the people that liberals have been supporting, and it's a hypocrisy. You say you don't stand for capitalism, but you're voting in people who are really, really big capitalists. So you're starting to see it. I mean, they're bringing it out here, and that's why I wanted to play this clip, is that they're bringing out the hypocrisy. They're bringing out the aspect that these people are pretending to be something. And in the socialist, in the Marxist structures, lying is okay. They can tell you whatever you want to hear to get them elected, and then they go in and they're making these huge amounts of money. And if we get back to where politics used to be a position of service when you got down to it. When you got back to, more the original founding fathers, I mean, it was about serving people. It wasn't about this huge wealth movement of where you became incredibly wealthy in office. It was about upholding justice. It was about making sure that people's rights were protected. And that's not where we're at today. That's just simply not where we're at today. And this is why voting down straight party lines gets us into trouble. This is why allowing ourselves to be persuaded to go with this group or that group because they claim to be about the environment or they claim to have the philanthropic organization or whatever it is, gets us into trouble. Because we actually are voting against or allowing people in that are against the real, true core values and principles that most people, regardless of which side they're on, stand for. Now, I want to kind of bring up this piece because for those that think, oh, communism, China, socialism, hey, that's such a great thing. Well, first of all, a lot of the people that live there, they're not allowed to speak bad about the communist structure. There are some people that sincerely believe that they love it. There are some people that are brainwashed in it. And yet if they don't speak favorably out in public about the CCP or the communist structures and that whole party lines, the torture, the beatings, the things that they get put through are horrendous, absolutely horrendous. So that's something to think about. So in China, let's kind of give you a glimpse. You've got to have permission to move. So I bring this up, and I'm using this as an example because what is happening in China, the way that they live, is what has been getting implemented here in America. These same principles, if you think that they don't have a hand, the CCP, for example, doesn't have a hand in what's happening in America, I don't know if you're just not up on what's happening, if you're just turning a blind eye, I don't know. But when you get into the layers of things and you look at who is owning things, how they're controlling communications, what they have charge over, it's a lot here in America. And they're forcing these structures in. They're already laying the groundwork through our political figures in this. So do you think you're going to have a free structure? You think you're going to have fairness? Well, I'll tell you what, when these socialist structures hit, like what's in Agenda 2030, you are not going to get to choose. You don't get to choose things in your life. You don't get to go study whatever you want. And only, like in China, only about 20% of their people actually get to go have an education. So in this type of structure, for example, if you want to move, you will have to get permission to move. You can't just say, hey, I'm tired of living in the city, I'm going to go move to a rural area, or hey, the rural area isn't working for me, I'm going to go live in a city now. Or I want to move to this town instead of that town. You don't get to do that under these structures. You have to get permission for everything. There is no free choice. And they decide, depending on how much you are supporting the party, what you can and can't have. It is not equal. It's very much about suppression. Another piece here. China has only 5 religions, okay? People of faith find China outright hostile to religion, as a matter of fact. And you have Buddhism, Taoism, Islam, Catholicism, and Protestantism. Anything else is prohibited, which means you really don't have freedom of religion. You are told what books you can read. All of your media is controlled. You can't go search any site that you want to search on the internet or look at on the internet. You only get the ones that they decide you can have. Okay? That's not freedom. And so you got a lot of religions that won't be able to be allowed to exist. Jewish people need to consider that because that's not on their approved religion list. Christianity isn't on their approved religion list because they really don't want people having certain types of faith or certain types of belief. And when you get down into it, even in their own constitution, states that Chinese citizens enjoy freedom of religious belief, but they don't really, because if you are a religious believer, you can't join the Chinese Communist Party. If you're not part of the CCP or working for them in some way, then you are in third world conditions. You get almost nothing. The party members are banned from joining religions, and if you believe in communism, then you're believing in atheism, because they go hand in hand, and they continue to squash out belief, faith, any aspect of holding God. So no matter what your background or your belief system is, for the most part, if you believe there's a God, if you believe there's a creator, if you believe there's a divine being, then that doesn't work in the system. They're not going to allow that. And so basically, the CCP is basically the government. The believers can't serve in the government if they have any kind of religion. And Chinese school children, they're taught at a young age that religion's a horrible superstition, and that they need to hate people that believe in God. I mean, if you call that compassion, I don't call that compassion. I don't call that in alignment with the soul's path. They have intense work schedules there, which are dictated to you. Okay? The work culture is known as 996, and that is 12 hours a day from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. So you're working 12-hour days, 6 days a week. And you've got certain quotas, and those quotas get stricter and stricter and stricter until it becomes impossible, and then that gives them a reason to beat you or whatever else. You have all kinds of production numbers. It's slave labor. It's a slave labor system. So if you think that people are going to get good earnings and good wages under these types of systems, they're not. They might bait you up front and say, oh, let's give you $15 an hour minimum wage. You think those elite people are going to work for $15 an hour? Oh, hell no. That's not going to happen. They're not going to come down and be equal pay with everybody else. It's not going to happen. And these systems, that's what it does. It turns people into slave labor. So when you're supporting these systems, you're actually supporting slave labor in this process. The journalists have to be a member of the Communist Party, which means they cannot work from a conscience. They don't have ethics. They're trained to lie. They cannot be part of any belief or faith religion whatsoever. And the journalists are expected to wear awareness, they say, to raise awareness of the rule of law. But really what they're doing is they're safeguarding the country's political and cultural security, as well as social stability. So it has nothing to do with reporting the truth. It has nothing to do with, you can't speak up and say there's an injustice happening here. It has nothing to do with that. It's all about supporting the narrative, and that we already see in our country right here and now. Being a jerk can cost you in China. Okay, so social harmony, they say, is essential to their plans. To enforce this, they've encouraged ideological compliance, and in 2007, they came up with plans for new technology-focused policy based on social cohesion. Well, here's one of those things. It sounds good on the surface, right? Everybody get along, everybody be in harmony, but part of that means that you don't get to have a different opinion. You don't get to see things outside of the way the CCP wants you to see them. And so they have these aspects of monitors which punish unsocial behavior. So everything's run off of this social score, which you've probably heard about, and they've been trying to implement that. If you search certain sites, your social score goes down. If you search sites that support the CCP and that will feed you their programming, then your social score goes up. Things like this. This is done because they don't. If you have different views and different viewpoints and different ideas and people asking questions, then that's going to destabilize that one-party centralized rule. And they don't want that. They've got this creepy leadership ad that's in there, which is this competition about how the highest death toll in history that's in there. You know, who's got a tendency towards violent excess and things like that. I mean, it's crazy, some of these things. You need a WeChat app to do anything, so everything has to be done through your phone. Why is this? This is all about control. This is all about being able to control what you can and can't have. And if you don't buy through this, you can't get anything. Everything has to be purchased through this. This is that digital currency avenue. And why is this? Because they can control what you have and what you don't have. And it's just crazy, the insanity. The college exams there are driving students to suicide. This is what I was talking about. Millions of Chinese high school students are busy preparing for their college exams. Almost 10 million Chinese students every year take a test that is basically their only chance to get into almost any of China's universities. So forget about the SAT stress. China's National College Entrance Examination is known as the most feared test in the world. And according to Berkeley Political Review, schools may select just 1 in 500,000 applicants, and about 20% of all of students will not be accepted to any university at all. So right off the bat, 20% don't even get to go to a school. Even though they've applied, even though they have the resources to do it, they can't go because they won't be accepted. So if you think these systems are going to give education to all, give everybody an equal chance at opportunity, it's not. And, you know, they say, you know, we're still, when it comes to the best universities, only 1% make it into the universities, and they have to prove things. You know, they have to prove compliance. They have to prove loyalty in some ways to the CCP. It's absolutely crazy. You know, during the test, they have drones that are flying over to try to catch cheaters. I mean, and students that don't get in, students that are challenged, they just commit suicide there because they'd rather commit suicide than be exposed to the other tortures. You have to have tracking apps. Everything is tracked. Your life is tracked constantly. And that's not a good thing. That's completely away from freedom. And your business works for the government, so you don't really own your business. And so all of you liberals out there that like being self-employed, that like having your own business, that like doing your own thing, guess what? You don't get to have influence over that. And if your business isn't doing a certain a certain status, you're not going to be able to keep your business. You won't be able to do it. So you're not going to have choice of jobs. You're not going to have a choice to go to school or not go to school in these systems. The Great Firewall of China, that's where they block things out. So they dictate what you can and can't see. You can't just go search whatever app that you want. They've got these really creepy facial recognition software things that are in there to identify you, to work with all these different apps. So you got to think about these things really, really careful. Now, this clip comes from Project Veritas, and it has the one that exposes, this is one of 3 clips that Project Veritas put out that exposes CNN for their corruption. And this just goes to verify, again, that climate change is the next thing. And this is why liberals will be targeted, because liberals are so heavy on the environment, so heavy on climate. And this is it. And this is the leak that shows this is what's coming in. They're telling us the race narratives are going out. People are getting bored with it. So the next thing is climate change. So you get in that? It's really, really crazy what they're doing. As always, they tell you what they're going to do. But CNN is one of the channels that most liberals praise and go to. But repeatedly, they are having to retract their statements. They've repeatedly been caught validating that they are spreading disinformation, that they are spreading propaganda. But this is the one that liberals get sucked into. And it just goes to show the brainwashing, the corruption, the agendas that are there. And they're getting sucked into it because they're selling liberals into it. I'm not here to tell people who to listen to or not listen to, but if you're going to listen to it consciously and listen to it knowing they're not giving you the total truth. Now, we have this other clip here, which comes to us. It was put out, and a lot of liberals like Bill Maher because he is a liberal through and through. And in this clip, he really exemplifies, because what I think we see have happening here is Bill Maher is more of that the older, original liberal. He's rooted more in that than the modern liberals. And so this is what I'm talking about. They're going to start dividing the liberals, and you're going to have that older, traditional liberal coming in conflict with the modern liberal. Listen to what he's got to say. I love that he's really bringing it forward, that he's really coming forward with people and bringing this around to what is reality. And I think, again, this is so important because I think that liberals can be so powerful in our society. They have such a powerful voice. They're filled with so much passion. They really, when we get back to the classic original liberals and the original foundations, I think most people in America share the basic foundations of freedom, of people having equal opportunities. But again, we've got to come together with this. And I want liberals to be paying attention because they are a target and they know that they can divide you. And we're going to be talking about division here very soon in one of the next upcoming segments to this series. And it is so very important that we don't let them do this. And when we look at these codes and we look at the opportunities and we see those codes of liberals and we see the peace there, and all liberals need to do is to align with their soul self. All they need to do is to place divine presence first. You don't have to believe in a specific religion, but you hold so much power right now. And you can be so valuable to this earth if you don't let yourself get sucked in by these narratives. If you don't let yourself support people because of a political party affiliation. If you will realize what is really going on with these people that many liberals support, and that they are the elite, and that they are operating in these double standards, and that we have no reason to justify violence and hurting people, and to sit there and claim that we're, that you're about ethnicities and supporting opportunities and equity and giving these people opportunities, and then you turn around and destroy the businesses. You do that, you're not about those people, you're about an agenda. So I'm calling to you to please, please come together. We need to come together, we need to work together, and we need to find our balances, and we need to have good, strong conversations that help us pave a better future. I'll see you guys in the next segment. Take care. If you want to check out more of my work, compassioncodes.com. And don't forget, thumbs up, give it a like. Let me know what you're thinking. Share your thoughts. Share your thoughts. Are you willing to come together? Are you willing to work with people who are in opposite positions? Are you willing to take a look at the power that you have if you're a liberal? Are you willing to, if you're not a liberal, work with liberals? Throw some comments in. Tell me what you think. You got topics that you want me to share, that you want me to address, that you want me to talk about? I'll be happy to do it. I just will work with it piece by piece. I'll take those suggestions in, but don't be afraid to leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, go ahead and click the little bells or whatever so that you can make sure you get the messages to let you know when the new videos come out. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you soon.